Let's get up. Yeah, woo. Hi, I'm Brian Deurloo. I'm the president of Frog Creek Partners. We have a very great group of panelists up here today. Brian Rowley, the principal civil engineer for Clark County Regional Flood District. David Skoudas. He's a design, construction, maintenance director for the Mile High Flood District. And Tyler Dell, closest to me, is the senior civil stormwater program manager of the Public Works Engineering City of Longmont. And so we're going to talk stormwater for the next 38 minutes. And I'd like to, just a little bit of background, pull up my notes here just for a second, is now water is a touchy subject. Climate change even more so. Do you believe in climate change or do you not believe in climate change? That climate change is not the issue that we're talking about today. We're talking about water. And a lot of people, as you know, I come from the mining and oil and gas background, and now I'm in an environmental space, so it's kind of a yin and yang, so to speak. But I tell a lot of people there's no such thing as Republican water or Democrat water. It's all water, and we need to have clean water. And these guys right here are on the front lines of making sure that we do have clean water, and they're going to have some very valuable insight, I believe. And so the intent of this panel, I've thought a lot about it, and we've had some discussions about it, is our intent right now is to hopefully teach, you guys walk away with some of the lessons learned that these gentlemen have so diligently constructed throughout their professional career, and that you can take back to your home city or state and hopefully facilitate those in yours. But water is generally, when you're designing infrastructure, one of the last things you think of and one of the first problems that you have. So I'm going to go ahead, if you guys could take each a couple minutes, please, and introduce what you do, where you do it, why you do it, and maybe a little bit of a fun fact or a hobby that you do for fun, please.
All right, I guess since I'm here, I'll start. My name's Tyler Dell. I work for the City of Longmont as a civil engineer and stormwater program manager. What I primarily work on is meeting compliance with our municipal separate storm sewer system permit or MS4 permit compliance, but also help provide support for general drainage concerns and issues that crop up for the general City of Longmont, both looking at some private infrastructure, which is always fun, dealing with infrastructure that you don't own, but the state still makes you responsible for, as well as some of our public infrastructure, which is having to cooperate or collaborate a lot with other departments, other groups, people that have their own jobs and responsibilities and things to do, but you're trying to explain to them the importance of stormwater management, and keeping our stormwater clean. One of the things that I enjoy doing living in Colorado is going out into a lot of our beautiful wildlife areas and getting to enjoy some of the trails and parks and things that we are able to build. And I think I'll turn it over to Dave because he builds a lot of that stuff.
Oh, thanks, Tyler. Dave Skoudas, I'm the design, construction, and maintenance director at the Mile High Flood District. For people who don't know who the district is, simply put, we're a special district that encompasses the greater metro Denver area, and we help facilitate the rhyme and reason to how our urban waterways are managed as they cross 40 city and county boundaries. And we do several different things: flood warning, master planning, floodplain mapping, research criteria, but my role is in managing our capital design and construction and then waterway maintenance services. And so I get a lot of fulfillment out of, I like to say I get to build infrastructure that looks like nature. You know, sometimes we get to put pipes in the ground and bury them, and while there's a time and a place for that, the before and after pictures are a lot less satisfying because there was a road before and then there's a road after, and I just have to tell people, trust me, the pipe is down there and it's protecting people. But the type of work that gets me really jazzed is when we get to build infrastructure that looks like nature and you get to walk around it, and it gets to be provide flood protection on a rainy day, and then a lot of value for recreation, open space, wildlife on sunny days and every single day for that matter. Personal note, grew up always been a big basketball player, and somewhere along the lines during COVID, I decided that I like basketball shoes, and so that's what I do, just in case a basketball game breaks out. But I'm 45, and basketball isn't as kind to me anymore, so now it's pickleball because it's just
All right.
a lot easier on the body. So
I had a flashback of Phil Knight when I met you. You know, the sneakers and the suit on.
I saw a speaker at another conference wearing basketball shoes in a situation like this, and it was like it gave me permission. I was like, yes.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
Awesome. Dave definitely has the best shoes on stage. We'll give him that. But we might be brothers, long lost brothers. A lot of what he said, we kind of have sister agencies in a way. So I'm from my name's Brian Rowley, and I'm from the Clark County Regional Flood Control District, which is Southern Nevada. It's where Las Vegas is. And I am a Golden Knights fan. So I'll just throw that out there. It's kind of dangerous to say probably in this room. And a Raiders fan, which just makes it worse, huh? So yeah, that might have just ruined my panel experience up here.
I didn't know to be a referee up
I
here,
know that
too.
was, but I also love pickleball, so that's fun. But we do a lot of similar things. We are the agency in Southern Nevada that coordinates all aspects of trying to build a flood resilient community. And so that involves stormwater master planning, where we're trying to get a plan for the entire valley, the entire county, and identify where our problems are. And then that translates into our CIP program, where we can fund and program projects to hopefully mitigate those problems. And then we see everything from there through construction projects, and then we deal with the maintenance. We fund the maintenance and support the local entities. Similar, I think you said 40 or so. We have 6, so not as many, but we are working across jurisdictions with our local cities and agencies. And so really, it's a fun entity to be a part of. We're very small and nimble. So we only have 25, and there's about 6 of us that are engineers. Our revenues are about 150 million a year. So we're able to operate on about 5% of that, and then the rest of that money can go into projects. And so we're able to get things done. We work with all agencies, all the consultants, and the different construction companies. So it's a great position in trying to make a difference in Las Vegas. And fun fact, most of my life I was a volleyball player, and I won a national championship with BYU in 2004. And so that was kind of a highlight. And then I was away from volleyball for a long time. And then as my kids got older, I jumped back into that world of club volleyball. Hopefully none of you are club volleyball parents in here. If you are, you know you've given up your entire life to volleyball. But I love coaching. I love doing that too. So on the weeknights and Fridays and other things, I'm always on the volleyball court. So that's what I do.
Cool, thank you. That's interesting. So as I was coming up with some questions for the panel, most of us are along the Front Range here in Colorado, so that's what we're thinking of, and we're probably getting 15 to 16, maybe even 17 inches of rain a year here. Where Brian, you get 15 days of rain a year, 4 inches of. So this question, so it might be interesting. There's this thing that I learned. There's not only wet weather runoff, there's dry weather runoff, because air pushes pollution and dirt and stuff like that, very similarly to how water flows. So that your perspective is important on this next question. I'll start with you, Brian, and work backwards here. Can you share an example of an innovative stormwater management project you've been involved in? What made it successful, and what challenges did you face?
I think of in terms of what we're trying to do, is a lot of what we do is try to get the water safely through our urban areas and out to Lake Mead is where all of our runoff goes. And so maybe just on the line of the Raiders, that was a really interesting project that just happened. So in 2017, the Raiders decided that they were going to come, and if you've been through I-15 in Las Vegas, you've seen that amazing stadium that was built. And under that site, we had a storm drain that was running west to east across the northern part of the site. And when the stadium was initially proposed, the stadium was going to be on the southern portion of the site, so there was no conflict, no problem at all. The storm drain could just stay where it is under the parking lot. And then as they got into the early phases of designing the stadium, they realized that they wanted to push the stadium to the north and open it up to have kind of a view of the strip. And so all of a sudden, our storm drain had to be moved, and that particular storm drain was built by a federal agency, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And so all of a sudden, we knew we were going to need a permit and a 408 permit, and we were going to have to go through all of this. Well, long story short, all of a sudden, this storm drain that was under the parking lot almost delayed the entire first year of the Raiders coming to Las Vegas, like it was becoming a huge issue. And
That's what you get.
I know, right? See, I mean, if it was the Broncos, I'm sure it would have been fine. Stormwater approvals, but smooth as everything. So, long story short, this became a huge deal. The Corps was not doing any more reviews for those type of permits that year because they'd run out of budget. And so this was a good example of how, storm drain and stormwater touches all aspects of almost every project. And all of a sudden we were front and center. This was a $360 million stadium, and our $500,000 storm drain all of a sudden was the key part of the entire project. And so our governor was involved. Every designer, our district was working with the Corps to get a permit, and we were able to do that with some creative funding and some really good engineering, and we expedited the permit, and we're able to get that done. And so in the end, we moved. The very first phase of the project was to take this storm drain that went straight across the site, and we just moved it 200 feet to the west and ran it around. So it's still under the Raiders parking lot, but not under the stadium for safety and other reasons. And so that was a really fun project, very successful, and a good example of kind of how we're involved in a lot of different things in Vegas.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Dave?
Innovative, interesting,
Yeah,
be clever and
some
witty.
innovative stormwater projects, what worked well, and what challenges did you face with the
Yeah, I'll cite a project that it wasn't actually my project, but we had involvement in it, and basically it was a flood mitigation project, commercial corridor, floodplain all over the place, videos of these buildings getting flooded, people driving through flooded roads, and there's very little space to do anything really interesting. But the design team and the stakeholders came up with a really innovative solution that tried to wring as much function out of this much space as they possibly could, with the main goal being flood protection. But because it doesn't flood very often, what was this going to be like on a daily basis? And the really clever solution they came up with was to put a box culvert underground and then a channel on top of it to carry the base flows and really small flows. So you had both, but they squeezed the open channel on top of the box culverts. And so basically the low flows that come in from upstream, they go through the open channel. You get all sorts of wetland vegetation. This goes right into the South Platte River. And then there's sort of a bypass structure at the upstream that in bigger flows, it'll also employ or start using the box culvert. And so pretty much that box culvert sits there dry like 99% of the time. And I think they just probably have to keep people from camping in there. But in the meantime, on a daily basis, and for every other event besides a really big flood, you've got this nice wetland channel providing water quality benefits, wildlife habitat, and all those sorts of things. So it was it really was the best example I've seen of making lemonade out of lemons. When you've got this much room and you can't buy these buildings and tear them down, it's what do we do? They could have just done a concrete line channel or a bigger box culvert, but they looked for something a little better, and I thought that was a really great solution.
Yeah, for people that can picture that and understand stormwater, that is an interesting innovation. Tyler?
Yep. So with my project, it was one of those fun times when, as municipal staff, you see a project has been going on for over a year, and then you get notified before it's ready to go out to bid that, hey, we're about ready to build this building. Are we good with our MS4 permit? To which I respond, no, you're disturbing an acre. You need water quality. You need during construction water quality measures. You also need post-construction measures. Like, well, we already designed our entire site and we don't have any room for post-construction measures.
Just a little interjection, like I said earlier, it's the last thing you think of and the first problem you've got.
Absolutely. So granted, there was this was an affordable housing project, so a housing crisis along the Front Range. There's a lot of issues with housing and being able to build enough housing. So there was a lot of pressure we need to build these houses. How can you make this work? So it was a cool concept where the city and this private development had to work together, where we were able to fit the water quality into our right-of-way because we had a wider pedestrian access, and we were able to actually creatively work in rain gardens along the building front, able to get those installed. And they're also able to use some of their courtyard space that they're planning on constructing anyways that was going to be landscaped, and able to turn some of those into rain gardens. One of the cool parts about this is they really had to work with some of the landscape architects to figure out how can we get something to grow in the middle of a courtyard of a bunch of 5-story buildings? So they had a really good vegetation profile to still make sure we're getting that healthy vegetation to provide that pollutant removal, when at the same time making sure it's actually going to live. You want your vegetation to be alive. And the other fun, challenging part outside of this is, while there's some great coordination with the landscape architect and with the city, and it sounds like a fairly successful story, there was one group that was left out of our coordination, and that was the architect. So one of the fun things that ended up happening when we got our first rainstorm in our brand new rain gardens is one of the buildings was getting water inside of it. So like, well, that's a fairly significant problem. It turns out that the architect and their weep holes weren't quite in alignment with the fact that there's now a rain garden outside of their building. But some quick masonry work got that all fixed up, and now the rain gardens are working great, and it didn't slow down the project too much.
Cool, thank you.
Hey, Brian, a real
Yes.
quick observation with both your examples. I would just add that that was one of the epiphanies as an agency that we really had in recent years, was how early in the land development process we really need to go and find people and insert ourselves to it. Because when we have space, we have all sorts of options to do different things, but as soon as we have no space, then now we're in trouble. And so we've really tried to learn more about the land development process and not try to just be a victim or just be on the receiving end of it every time. So that's been interesting.
Yeah, it is hard when you've got this brownfield development opposed to greenfield development, and having to squeeze storm scepters or whatever kind of green infrastructure that you want downtown into city blocks. It's not easy. It's not an easy job. Okay, so little quick story. As you know, I'm in stormwater filtration, so it's near and dear to my heart. And one of the reasons I'm in it, I learned years ago, Dr. Ellie Slaughter at the San Diego State University proved that one smoked cigarette butt placed into a liter of water with 10 minnows will kill half the fish in 4 days. So one cigarette butt can kill up to 5 fish, and there's about 4.3 trillion cigarettes littered around the world every year. So I think about that, but there's also other pollutants like tire treads with 6 ppd in there that is proven to cause cancer in fish. It's decimating fish populations in the Northwest, plus the heavy metals and hydrocarbons that are falling off cars and so forth. So in your guys' experience, starting, Dave, if we don't mind, we'll start with you first, and whoever wants to tackle it after that. But in your experience, what impact does litter and debris have on stormwater management systems, and how do you address this?
Oh man, how do you address it? I mean, ideally, people aren't throwing cigarette butts and water bottles out on the pavement and big gulps. I mean, that's just
Baby
and
diapers.
shopping carts.
Baby diapers.
So many shopping carts.
Yeah.
We pull so many shopping carts out of waterways. You wouldn't believe it.
But we got rid of those plastic bags, so that's a win.
For anybody from out of state, you can get plastic bags in the stores, but you got to pay for them. So you get charged for it, like individually. So you get a really incentive. Even though it's like 10 cents, it's enough for me to be annoyed. So I always bring my bags in. So that's helped. Thank you, Tyler. As far as it's really problematic for us. My agency does a lot of work to clean up our urban waterways, and I think, but for public education programs, it's really getting those individual users to think, maybe I shouldn't throw this on the ground. I mean, but for that, there's still going to be a supply of those materials. But for those that don't know, in Colorado, we have had the rainiest summer probably, I think, in recorded history these last few months. I forget how much rain we've had. It's been like 14, 15 inches, which is what we usually get in a whole year. Total precipitation we've got in the last 2 months, and it's been really constant. And we had one interesting project where we built a new face to this big box culvert and put a big trash rack on it, and it was really to keep people out of the box, because this is an older box that goes for like a mile under a big strip mall and then eventually comes back out. And as soon as we put the trash rack on, which was pretty much last winter, we have had to have a contractor out there almost weekly with an excavator picking all the debris off of this like 60-foot wide, 30-foot long, 60-foot long, 30-foot wide trash rack. And it's been really tough. And some of it's been vegetated debris, like down limbs and trees. And so when I asked the project manager, is there any sort of forestry work we can do upstream, maybe some pruning and it's all on private property, so that's probably no dice. So we do the best we can to install these facilities at localized spots where we can get to it most easily. That's the best I've found that we can do in our role.
Education, I heard, like storm outreach is, I heard early on you say that as well.
Yeah, hearts and minds.
Yeah, right.
I'll
Brian?
jump on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do. We have kind of this twofold mission where one is keep the floods away from people, and that's through building, and then the other side is keeping people away from floods. And so we do a lot of outreach. We spend a lot of money on ads, and it's interesting you said the cigarette butts. One of our recent ads showed people dropping cigarette butts in the storm drain, and then it showed them later in the shower, and all the cigarette butts come out on them and stuff. And so
I need to find that.
Yeah,
I
so
have
that's a
seen
good
that
one.
commercial, and
Have
it
you
is
seen
hysterical.
it's pretty. Yeah, it got
That's
a lot
awesome.
of traction. But
I'm gonna look.
one other thing. So this is kind of a funny story. We're looking at some tests to see how to get water into our system at the drop inlets and the grates and how to be effective. And we're working with a lab, and interestingly, they can throw debris into the water and kind of see how that interacts with the grate. And so they had this funny question of like, what's a typical debris mix in Las Vegas, like sand, gravel? And we're like, well, it'd be like stripper club flyers, face cards, like some beer
Right.
bottles, like. So
Glitter.
yeah, it's like, so how do you design your urban debris mix to test for your drop inlets? So I don't know if anyone's looking for a PhD topic or something, but maybe we could design your debris. But a couple things that we have been doing that is working pretty well. We have a lot of linear facilities, over 675 miles of underground channel storm drain. And then those connect to big regional detention basins. And so our detention basins are the primary hub or focus of stormwater quality. And what we do is we have some berms there to stop and hold the water there for 24 hours and let those fines and pollutants and other things settle. And I say pollutants like cars, mattresses, all kinds of stuff that's there. So that helps. And then with the homeless, that is a big challenge for us. And one of the things that we've been doing recently is we've been changing our chain link fence for expanded metal fence. If you haven't heard of that, it's getting a lot of use lately. It's a little more expensive, but you can't cut it. It's very hard to climb. You can't put your feet or your hands into it. And so we've been doing that and having some success with some new fencing. And so we're going to keep exploring how to best use that, but we have some new specs now, and so that's something you might want to look at.
Where do you put this new fencing, Brian?
Around, so just protecting the access points to the channels and storm drains, so places
Oh.
where you would typically enter or trespass.
Mm.
So we're just trying to prevent that access a little bit, and that's helping. And then something else we've done is when we've got some entities that have gone and they've got recurring problems, like certain areas where they've got encampments or people that have brought in a lot of debris. If they spend money recurring, every year, then what we've done is we've initiated a pilot program where we're actually paying a security team to patrol those storm drains, which is kind of new for us. And so after they clean it out and get the debris out and they help the people that were there to relocate, then we're just paying a security team to go by there once or twice a day. And voluntarily, they're not engaging, but they're just trying to keep people moving out. And that's been extremely successful at a fraction of the cost to pay that security team. And so we're going to keep kind of expanding that program and see how it goes. But it's a new concept to have security for us patrolling storm drains, but we think there's some benefit there.
Now, is that mainly on the strip? Like,
No.
or is this all over
It's
Vegas?
all over, yeah. So it's just, there's just certain parts of our, if you've seen documentaries, we have a large population that lives in our storm drains and our channels. And so it's a valley-wide problem, and it's a nationwide problem, if we're honest. And it's very difficult because we can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and clean and help and provide services, and then 2 weeks later, it's back. And so this is something that was a little outside of the box. And like I said, it feels weird to have a security team on storm drains instead of a building or something. But it's starting to work for us, so we're going to explore that a little more.
Well, when you have a closed loop water system like Las Vegas does, where all the water from your stormwater goes to Lake Mead and you're
Right.
drinking that a month later,
Right.
it's protecting your resource.
Yep.
From the sounds of it. Tyler?
Yep. So I get to approach this from a slightly different impact of, because we know that the trash, the debris, that it's coming. My whole job revolves around that reality that we know that trash and debris exists. So the MS4 permit is designed to try to remove some of those. The fun thing is that a lot of people think or don't think about what we do with it once we collect it in our systems. there seems to be a thought that it's going to magically disappear and just keep functioning. So we get a lot of thought and effort into the design process, but the actual long-term operation and maintenance of these facilities that we're trying to install in order to remove that trash and debris often get neglected, often get unfunded, until there gets to be large issues. One of the big analogies we'd like to share with folks is like getting the oil changed on your vehicle. You can choose to not change your oil on your vehicle because it costs too much. You don't want to pay the 50 or what is it, $100 now to change your oil. Probably is a little closer to the mark. You could say that's too expensive. I can't afford to do that, and I'm not going to change my oil. So 3,000 miles comes around, you don't change your oil, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000 miles. You never changed your oil and you saved $400 or $500 at the end of the day, but now you have to replace your engine. A lot of times that's how these stormwater facilities go. If you aren't addressing that trash and debris regularly, eventually you're going to have a big problem that's going to come up and the facility's not going to function. You're going to have to mobilize a lot more people. You're going to have a much more expensive operational item. So it's really important to make sure we're getting that long-term O&M budgeted. And that's a lot of times what we work for. And sometimes it's just as simple as education and outreach still, like what everyone else has been discussing, where you teach them that if we build infrastructure to keep the dirt out of the pond or out of the creek, you don't want to clean the infrastructure by removing the dirt and putting it into the creek. We see that happen more often than we'd care to admit, that a lot of times the way these things get cleaned ends up being detrimental to their actual function. So that's one of the big ways that I see trash and debris. I'm kind of on my side where we're trying to even address it, but still the way we're doing it or the lack of funding that we have to do it can be problematic.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so back to weather. I'm 50 years old. I don't know, that's the depth of my knowledge on the global weather. I have to trust what some people are telling me, whether it's getting wetter or drier or windier or what have you. But let's go ahead and assume that weather events are getting a lot more extreme these days, and we are seeing a lot more rain in Colorado and Wyoming and so forth. But I know this is a big question, and it's a hard one to answer because how do you calculate in climate change? How do you calculate in these bigger storm events that are happening? And is it? And I'm not being negative. But it's something that calculates into the narrative. Is it Chicken Little? Is it just a roll in the climate right now? It's going to dip back down. It's going to be fine. Or are we putting too much money towards planning bigger infrastructure? I'm sorry, I'm kind of tangential, but how should our approach to stormwater management evolve to better mitigate the impacts of these larger storm events? Tyler, if you want to address that first, please.
Sure. So one of the things that we've started is what data do we look at for design? There's always been a historical, or I guess the general practice has been, hey, the more data, the longer data we have, the better. But now we're starting to bring that into question. Does what happened 50 years ago, is that as impactful as what happened last year, or does it really matter? Does it not? And so we're starting to see, regardless, that we're getting different kind of events each and every year. Rainstorms are like snowflakes. There's no two the same. And as much as we have our design storms where we're trying to size these facilities, the real world is going to come and it's going to need to use and operate through that system. One of the ways I know we've been looking at trying to address that, not necessarily even looking at the extreme events, but just for some of the regularly occurring events that may increase in frequency. So we're not talking about a NOAA event or anything like that. We're talking about getting a ½ inch of rainfall 10 times instead of 5. And the effect that has on urban streams can be very detrimental. And one of the ways we're trying to address that is through using infrastructure like green infrastructure, low impact development, and really trying to use some of those practices to let nature kind of take care of itself. The natural environment, native soils, vegetation, it's actually very, very effective of removing pollutants, of managing stormwater. And if we use these systems and try to not make our concrete jungles as much, but just implement a bit of green infrastructure, get some of those soils, some of that vegetation in our urban systems, we find it's been having a very substantial effect and impact, particularly for those smaller storms. So that's one way that I know we've been trying to address that in Longmont.
Interesting. Dave?
Yeah, so when it comes to climate change, right now there's not enough data and science to say that in a place like Colorado, we should change how we're uh, defining the 100-year flow or 100-year flood. There's just so much uncertainty, variability baked into figuring that how much rain that is to begin with. It's something like a 20 to 30% confidence interval already. So we would have to have a ton of new rainfall data to say, you know what, now we need to increase our rainfall amounts that we use to figure out what a 100-year flood is. But some places where we're starting to see some impacts is really more of like the daily and chronic sort of situations. And none of them have really manifested themselves too dramatically yet, but it's things we're keeping an eye on. So for instance, our design approaches these days really are a lot more naturalized, as kind of Tyler was referring to. And that means we're trying to rely a lot more on vegetation for stability than things like rock and concrete. But to have vegetation means you have to have water in the creek. And oftentimes, in a lot of our first order, second order streams, these really small creeks that they might have a name, but they're small enough you can just hop across it on a daily basis. They often have flow in them. There's so many creeks called Dry Creek, Little Dry Creek, Big Dry Creek. There's like dozens of them. And it's like, no, there's a Little Dry Creek in Arapahoe County. And yes, there's another one up in Adams County. And no, they're different. I tell my wife this, and she just gets so confused. But they end up not looking dry now because there's so much lawn irrigation return flow. People are using their sprinklers. The irrigation return flow is now creating a base flow on these creeks, and they have daily flow and a lot of wetland vegetation, and that's great. But as water supply starts getting threatened and dwindling, eventually we're gonna have less and less lawns. We're gonna have less of that lawn irrigation return flow, and our vegetative approaches are gonna need to be rethought a little bit, or what sort of vegetation is gonna keep this channel stable. So something we're keeping an eye on. I'll just share another brief example I heard recently that's not really in stormwater, but it's more in sanitary. And a gentleman from the city of Golden who works with their water and wastewater systems was saying how their sewer pipes, there are different tables that say for a certain diameter pipe, it needs to have a certain slope to be self-cleansing. All right, well, that works if people are flushing their toilets and using their showers and have faucets and plumbing fixtures that use a certain amount of water. But now if we have all these high efficiency things, there's less water going into the wastewater system. And he was describing how they're having their sewer lines clogged now because people are actually using less water. So it's like good and bad. So all these things, it's both.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, it reminded me of a story. There was a park that was being built across the street from our house. And the first phase of the park was a storm drain, big underground concrete box to make room to put a park and the whole thing on top. I was driving along with my 11-year-old son, and he's like, what would happen if it rained so much that would flood, right? Like if it didn't have enough space. I'm like, oh, no, it won't. Like we design it, we look at the storm, we have all this data, so we make it really big. He's like, Dad, well, what if it did? What if it rained more? I'm like, no, it won't. Like it's good. He's like, Dad, what if it did? And I'm like, well, then it'll flood. And so he looks at me and he's like, well, would you get fired? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, why do they need you? Like, it was like this progression through his head. And
what exactly is it that you do, Dad?
And it's like something great you realize as a college student in hydrology is the best thing to go in as an engineer because you can do all this design work and then at the end it's totally wrong and you're just like, oh, it rained more than we thought it was going to rain. And so
You've
totally
always got
wrong.
volleyball to go back to.
Yeah, that's right. I can play volleyball. So along those lines, though, one of the things we try to do, our rainfall, we've already looked at it locally before NOAA Atlas 2, before NOAA Atlas 14, and we already applied a factor. This is just kind of like I'm standing on the shoulders of people that made that decision 30 years ago. But we have an adjustment factor that we've used for a long time, and so our rainfall has been re-reviewed and looked at several times. And we still feel like we're more conservative. So we designed for what we would be the 100-year storm, but it's greater than what is published as the 100-year storm. So that's nice. We also, because we're a flashy environment, we use the 6-hour design storm as our design event. And so it's a flashy event. And so And then what we like to say is we're adaptable, and we paid someone to do a study on from a university that came to us and shared some of the global models on climate change. And like you said, it was kind of, they left and we were still like, what did he just say after talking about it? And so we want to be adaptable as the science comes along. We'll keep iterating and doing what we need to do. But luckily, with some of that planning in the past, we've designed and kind of got out ahead of that a little bit. And so now the challenge for us is when these flashy events happen and the intensity might be going up for rainfall events, our big question is, what do we do to get that water into our storm drain? So we've sized it. We have a large enough system and capacity, but getting water off of an urban network, like from a road into an underground system or into a channel, if we have a weak spot in our system, it's the collection, and how do we get more efficient? And so we're looking at grates, we're looking at perpendicular and parallel, and how to maybe get the water off the surface quicker, because it's a shame when we build these $30 million storm drains, and then we get a storm and the water blows right past a collection point. That's certainly something we've got to improve upon and get that water off and into our system faster with the flashy storms. So.
Awesome, thank you. Well, we have a little over 3 minutes left, and I have to congratulate you. I've looked around the audience a couple times, and I've only seen no more than 3 people on their phones. So you guys are very engaging. So well done. About a minute each. I've got to ask this question because I've been using a lot. Artificial intelligence. I use ChatGPT. I name it a her. I call her Sheila, and I'm polite to her just in case. I say please and thank you, just in case the machines do turn on us. But in 1 minute or less, if Brian, will start with you. If you could tell, are you incorporating AI? What's your take on AI and working into your business?
Yeah, I mean, our particular entity is not doing a lot yet, but I would say hydrology and hydraulics is a prime field for artificial intelligence. And in my time, like, my master's degree was about computer modeling. It's like my favorite thing to do. And where we used to analyze a street or an area or a watershed, if you haven't seen now, with like the gaming computers and the artificial intelligence, and combined with the LiDAR and the radar rainfall, there are models being done now, like they've done it for the continent of Australia. There's a model that was like, we're going to rain on the entire continent and we're going to see where the water goes. And so the massive amounts of processing power is certainly going to be beneficial. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out for us. But I certainly see, like, in the world of H&H modeling, a very big opportunity and need to, I mean, we can process these FEMA flood zones now just so much faster than what we've done in the past. And hopefully that leads to better protected people and property.
Dave?
Yeah, I would say also we're not jumping on the bandwagon just yet in any really tangible way, but a couple examples I could think of that I'm really excited about is machine learning with photos and photo recognition, and being able to use that for people in the field doing different work. I actually heard somebody talk about potentially like erosion control inspectors taking a picture, and then the AI tells the inspector, flags it if it's a problem or not.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
But then why is the inspector there? I don't know. Maybe to tell the AI, hey, look, they were putting the silt fence in and it wasn't done yet, so that's why it's fine. But some other, not really AI, but in the next 5 to 10 years, the whole floodplain mapping and modeling industry is just going to get almost like blown up and started from scratch. I have a coworker who is actually credentialed for the White House, and she goes to DC and she's on this committee to help FEMA figure out how to regulate using 2D models, rain on mesh, and get away from these archaic 1D HEC-RAS models. And hopefully that'll make all our lives easier, and then map changes can just be the click of a button. That would be ideal.
That would be ideal. Tyler?
I am hoping for the day that we can scan a plan set and it can just do your development review for you. That would be the dream. Other than that, I think I've used AI to figure out our city cornhole team name. So that was pretty helpful as well. But
that's amazing. What's the name? I want to hear.
It came up with like 30 of them. Cornholios, the Great Corn Huskers. There's a good number of those.
I have to be honest, I did ask Sheila, what question should I ask the stormwater panel today? And she came up with a few. Yeah. Anything else, Tyler?
A lot of what these guys have said. Some of the modeling work would be great, but development review would be #1 on my list if I had to pick one.
All right. One thing I've learned from a mentor of mine is with AI, it's supremely important to have a human in the loop, which is a kind of a term that's kind of popping up. There's going to be a lot of new terms with AI, but a human in the loop of any kind of AI work is going to be critical. And that is the end of our panel. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much for your participation.